Before Alexander the Great, Macedonia still wasn't a major power. Poor, divided, and dismissed as barbarian by the Greek city-states, it seemed doomed to stay on the margins of history. Then, Philip II arrives, and everything changes at once. In less than 20 years, he turns his kingdom into the dominant force in Greece. He doesn't just win wars. He rebuilds an army, changes the rules of battle, and makes Macedonia Greece's military pivot. By the time his enemies understand what's happening, it's already too late. This is not Alexander the Great's story. It's the story of the father who made him possible. How does a kingdom on the edge of Greece become the power poised to conquer the world? Macedonia isn't a great power. It's a fragile kingdom with an estimated population of 400,000 to 800,000 and limited military capacity. In the 4th century BC, Macedonia has neither Athens' prestige, Sparta's military tradition, nor Thebes' political weight. It isn't a network of autonomous cities, but a rural, lightly urbanized territory dominated by warrior aristocracies and scattered land elites. To the Greeks in the south, Macedonia is still marginal, almost alien to their world, and often labeled barbarian. Yet that outsider position brings a strategic advantage. It controls the routes between the Balkans and the Aegean, between inland roads and the coasts. Macedonia has two faces. One is Pella, a growing political and administrative center. The other is the Aegai, the ancient dynastic seat of the Argeads, who claim Greek origins. Philip grows up on the hard frontier, but his education reaches beyond Macedonia. As a young man, he is held hostage in Thebes, where he encounters the military world that has just shattered Sparta's supremacy under Epaminondas. In 359 BC, everything seems lost. King Perdiccas III dies fighting the Illyrians, leaving the throne to his son, still a child, Amyntas IV. Illyrians press from the west, Paeonians from the north, Thracians from the east. Claimants backed by foreign powers appear, ready to carve Macedonia up. Philip, Perdiccas III's brother, becomes regent for the young heir. He immediately sees he can't afford to fight everyone at once. This is not the moment for courage, but for control. He buys time with negotiations, hostages, alliances, and promises of money. He splits his enemies, calms some, and isolates others. Within months, that provisional regency stops being provisional. Without proclamations or open breaks, Philip quietly becomes the kingdom's undisputed ruler. His task now is not conquest, but keeping Macedonia from disappearing altogether. Once the immediate crisis passes, Philip moves to the decisive phase, giving Macedonia stable economic and military foundations. Between 357 and 352 BC, he consolidates control of the northern Aegean coast through campaigns that change the kingdom's fate. He takes Pydna and Potidaea, strengthens access to the sea, and secures Crinides, later refounded as Philippi. He conquers Amphipolis, gaining direct access to Thrace's resources. Control of Mount Pangaean puts rich gold and silver mines in the king's hands. From here on, Macedonia can finance armies, diplomacy, and alliances. At the same time, a new Macedonian army takes shape. Philip reorganizes what's already there and turns it into a coherent system. At its center is the Macedonian phalanx, made up mainly of the Pesatyroi, the foot companions. It's a heavy infantry force numbering 20,000 to 24,000 men. They don't fight like hoplites. They stand in compact taxis of about 1,500 men, arranged 16 ranks deep. Their distinctive weapon is the sarissa, about 13 to 20 feet long. The front ranks strike at once, creating a wall of points that is extremely difficult to penetrate. It isn't flexible, but it's devastating at stopping an enemy head-on. From this point on, the Macedonian phalanx becomes the army's core and remains decisive for more than a century. Alongside the phalanx are the hypaspists, about 3,000 men, mobile troops used at critical points. On the wings ride the companion cavalry, 2,000 to 3,000 horsemen led directly by the king and built for breakthroughs. The army is rounded out with light troops, engineers, and siege machines. The result is an organized, disciplined force capable of operating on a large scale. During the sale of Methone, he loses an eye, a reminder that he leads operations in person. In these years, his marriage to Olympias, a princess of Epirus, strengthens the Western Front. In 356 BC, Alexander is born. Tradition will remember this period as unusually favorable. It's a sign that Macedonia is becoming a state capable of sustaining long-term expansion.
Did you know that most people who watch our documentaries aren't subscribed yet? If you enjoy animated maps and history, join our community. Leave a like and subscribe so you never miss the next episodes.
Between 352 and 346 BC, Philip takes the decisive step into Greek politics by exploiting a crisis already unfolding. The Third Sacred War gives him his pretext. The Phoenicians have seized Delphi and used the sanctuary's treasure, an act seen as sacrilege across the Greek world. The conflict sets two sides against each other. The Phoenicians, backed by Athens and Sparta, and a coalition led by Thebes and Thessaly. Philip is called in by the Thessalians and intervenes as an ally, and, formally, as the defender of Delphi. When he defeats Onomarchus at Crocus Field in 352 BC, he consolidates that role. He presents himself as the defender of religious order while using the crisis to extend control over Thessaly and move control to central Greece. When he tries to push farther, he runs into Thermopylae. Athens intervenes, occupies the corridor, and blocks access. Philip avoids a pitched battle and withdraws. From this point on, he has to alternate war, diplomacy, and political pressure. Demosthenes' speech against Philip, the Philippics, spread anti-Macedonian alarm. The word survives to this day. A Philippic is still a long, heated, polemical speech against someone. Between 349 and 348 BC, he campaigns against the Chalcidian League when Olynthus turns back toward Athens. He conquers the League's cities and destroys Olynthus, eliminating a regional power and firmly consolidating control over the northern Aegean. Unable to stop him, Athens accepts the Peace of Philocrates in 346 BC. The agreement recognizes Philip's conquests and marks a shift in the balance of power. In the same context, Macedonia enters the Amphictyonic League, the body that controls Delphi and brings Greek states together, gaining formal legitimacy within the Greek system. It's the first time a Macedonian king formally enters it. After the Peace of Philocrates, tension doesn't end. Philip wants to consolidate control of Thrace and push toward Perintheus and Byzantium, two cities that control access to the Straits and the Black Sea grain routes, vital to Athens. In 340 BC, he lays siege, but he has a limit. He isn't invincible yet. Both cities hold out, receive Athenian aid and even Persian support, so Philip is forced to give up. While he's tied down in the east, Alexander, barely 16, serves as regent, crushes the Mede revolt, and founds Alexandropolis, his first real act of command. In 339 BC, a new sacred war gives Philip a route back into central Greece. The crisis grows out of the dispute over Amphissa, and, again, Delphi gives him religious cover. The Amphictyonic Council appoints him to intervene. He advances, occupies Elatea in Phocis, and rewrites the strategic picture. For Athens, it's a shock. Demosthenes pushes for an alliance with Thebes, until then a rival, because the Macedonian threat now hangs over all Greece. On August 2nd, 338 BC, at Chaeronea, two military systems collide. The numbers are uncertain, but 30,000 to 35,000 men on each side is reasonable. The Macedonian army fields the phalanx, Hypaspists, and about 2,000 to 3,000 cavalry. The Greek coalition counters with hoplites from Thebes, Athens, and their allies, including the Theban Sacred Band. On the Athenian side, Philip uses a controlled retreat, drawing part of the opposing line forward and stretching its ranks. The battle reveals the Macedonian system's edge. Infantry holds the center, cavalry hits the flank. Alexander, 18, likely plays a role in the sector that shatters the Theban line. The defeat destroys the sacred band, and the Lion of Chaeronea preserves its memory. But Philip doesn't raise Thebes or strike Athens, even though he could. He stations a garrison in Thebes and cuts its political weight. Athens is spared because it still carries prestige, legitimacy, and above all, a fleet useful for the project against Persia. At Chaeronea, it isn't only an army that collapses. It is the idea that the Poleis can still decide Greece's fate on their own collapses with it. After Chaeronea, Philip has to turn victory into a stable order. Destroying Athens and Thebes would mean reopening war immediately. So he needs something else: legitimacy, political hostages, and above all, the Athenian fleet for the Persian project. So in 337 BC, he summons the Greek Poleis to Corinth and imposes a common peace. The League of Corinth is born. All major cities join except Sparta. The Poleis keep formal autonomy, but command rests in the Macedonian king's hands, appointed hegemon and strategos autocrator for the war against Persia. The project serves two purposes: presenting Macedonia as pan-Hellenic leader and preventing the Greek world from sliding back into civil war. The Asian expedition doesn't stay on paper. In 336 BC, Philip sends a vanguard across the Hellespont, about 10,000 infantry and 600 cavalry under Paminion, Attalus, and other commanders. The goal isn't to destroy the Achaemenid Empire outright, but to create a bridgehead in Asia Minor and encourage the Greek coastal cities to break from the great king. It's the clearest sign that the Persian plan is already underway while Philip is still alive. Meanwhile, the court begins to crack. Macedonian kings' marriages are instruments, not private affairs, and Philip has taken at least 7. When he marries Cleopatra Eurydice, the niece of Attalus, the dynastic problem explodes. During the wedding banquet, Attalus openly hints at the birth of a future heir, fully Macedonian. For Alexander, the son of Olympias, a princess of Epirus, it's a direct threat. The break with his father is immediate, and it pulls his mother into the conflict as well. The reconciliation comes, but it solves nothing. In 336 BC, at Aigai, during celebrations for the marriage of his daughter Cleopatra to Alexander of Epirus, Philip II is assassinated by Pausanias, one of his bodyguards. A personal motive is the strongest explanation. A wider conspiracy remains possible, but Alexander's direct complicity is neither proven nor supported by surviving evidence. Philip dies at the height of success. He has at least doubled and probably tripled the territory controlled by Macedonia, expanding it from roughly 8,000 to 10,000 square miles to more than 19,000 to 23,000. And he has imposed his hegemony over almost all of Greece. In the ancient world, borders are fluid, and accumulated power often means hegemony, not direct annexation. Add Thelsey, Chalcidice, and part of Thrace, an hegemony over Greece through the League of Corinth, and Philip's real sphere of power becomes far larger than Macedonia itself. Before conquering the world, Alexander risks losing everything, not because of the Persians, but because of his own father. Philip II has just subdued Greece. Power now rests with him, and Alexander looks like the obvious heir. Then, something changes. A new marriage, a potential new son. And for the first time, Alexander realizes the throne may not be his. At the Macedonian court, blood isn't enough. Power matters most. Alexander doesn't need to conquer the world yet. First, he has to win the right to rule. But what happens when his father is the one challenging his claim to the throne? Alexander is born in Pella in 356 BC, but his story begins earlier. Between 357 and 356 BC, Philip II marries Olympias, princess of the Molossians of Epirus. This isn't a private match. It's an alliance meant to secure Macedonia's western frontier and bind the kingdom to a powerful dynasty. Alexander enters the world as the product of politics, not just a household. The court he grows up in is already a machine of power. Philip, who over his lifetime will marry at least 7 times, rules a polygamous monarchy where succession is never truly secure. Pella is the kingdom's political center, but it's also where ambitions, kinships, and rivalries coexist every day. From the start, Alexander is shaped by 2 figures. On one side is Philip, wounded, pragmatic, always weighing decisions in terms of utility and risk. On the other is Olympias, an Epirot princess, devout, fiercely attached to her son. She isn't just a mother, she's a political presence, fully aware of her rank and of what her child represents. A Macedonian prince is not educated like a young Athenian. Before books, there's hunting, weapons, riding, discipline, and a constant competition with other nobles. In that world, ruling means imposing yourself. Even before Aristotle, Alexander has 2 important tutors: Leonidas, austere and severe, and Lysimachus, closer to the Homeric world. Through them, he absorbs a heroic image of himself. Achilles enters his imagination early, not yet as a philosophical model, but as a figure of greatness and pure glory. Around his birth, extraordinary, almost divine stories begin to circulate. but they should be treated for what they were: court legends useful for building prestige. During adolescence, something begins to take shape in Alexander beyond training and drill. At court, a story circulates about Bucephalus, the horse no one can mount. The animal is nervous, violent, unmanageable, and the price, according to tradition, is enormous: 13 talents. Alexander watches. He doesn't force the horse or try to dominate it. He understands that Bucephalus is afraid of his own shadow. He turns him toward the sun, calms him, and mounts. From that moment, Bucephalus won't be just a horse, but the companion who will follow him through much of his life into the Eastern campaigns. The episode already reveals his character: a cool head, sharp intuition, and the ability to notice what others miss. Even the name, probably meaning ox head, sticks, and so does the line attributed to Philip: Macedonia is too small for you. It's perfect for building the legend, but it should be treated as literary tradition, not a quote we can treat as word-for-word fact. Soon afterward, around 343 or 342 BC, Philip entrusts his son's education to Aristotle. The place is Mieza, not far from Pella. It's a political decision as much as a cultural one. The future heir must be shaped as a Macedonian prince, but also integrated into the Greek world. Here, Alexander studies Homer, ethics, politics, geography, zoology, theater, and medicine. Above all, his horizon expands. Macedonia is no longer the center of his world. Asia Minor, Persia, and India come into view. In these years, a core group of young nobles forms around him. Among them, Hephaestion and Ptolemy. They are companions in training before they are companions in war. In this setting, Achilles stops being a classroom hero and becomes a model for life. Swift glory, personal risk, eternal memory. The tradition of Alexander's personal copy of the Iliad, the one he will later carry with him, begins here. With Aristotle's education and Achilles as his mirror, Alexander stops thinking of himself as only Philip's son. He begins to think of himself as someone meant for more. In 340 BC, while Philip is campaigning against Perinthus and Byzantium, Alexander is about 16 and is left as regent in Macedonia. It isn't a ceremonial role. He has to administer the kingdom's center, keep order, and respond to frontier trouble while his father fights in the east. Philip's goal is clear: control access to the straits and straighten Macedonia's position in northern Aegean. Soon after, the Maedi, a Thracian border people, rebel. Alexander intervenes, suppresses the revolt, and founds a city called Alexandropolis. It's a brief episode, but politically important. For the first time, he acts not as the king's son, but as someone who punishes, occupies, and refounds. Even the name matters. It's the first city directly tied to his own. 2 years later, the decisive test comes. In 338 BC, at Chaeronea, Macedonia and the Greek coalition face each other in the clash that will decide Greece's fate. On one side stands Philip's army, on the other, Athens, Thebes, and their allies. The numbers are debated, but a cautious estimate is roughly 30,000 to 35,000 men on each side. Alexander is about 18. He isn't an independent commander yet, but he's no longer just a pupil. The sources suggest he played an important role in the Theban sector of the Macedonian line. But the essential point is this: at Chaeronea, Alexander fights for the first time in a truly decisive battle. On the Theban side stands the Sacred Band, an elite corps of 300 men. Its destruction symbolically marks the end of the Peleus' ability to stop Macedonia by force. But for Alexander, Chaeronea means something more. It's the moment his political adolescence ends. He is no longer just a prince in training. He is an heir who has already watched Greece fall. After Chaeronea, Philip stands at the height of his power. He has imposed Macedonian supremacy over Greece without destroying Athens, reduced Thebes' political weight, and in 337 BC, organized a new Greek order through the League of Corinth. Nearly all the Peleus, except Sparta, enter the system. Philip becomes hegemon and commander of the future war against Persia. In that setting, Alexander, already tested at 18, looks like the natural successor. And that's exactly when the succession reopens. In 337 BC, Philip marries Cleopatra Eurydice, a young woman of high Macedonian rank and the niece of Attalus, one of the most influential men in Philip's political and military system. In a polygamous monarchy, a marriage like this isn't private. If a male child is born from the union, the dynastic equation changes overnight. Alexander is Philip's son, but he is also the son of Olympias, princess of Epirus. In a court where bloodlines decide power, that fact alone can make him vulnerable. The breaking point comes at the wedding banquet. Ancient sources say Attalus, perhaps drunk, raises the toast that hints at the hope for a more legitimate heir, a fully Macedonian one. The line only makes sense in context inside a succession triangle. Alexander reacts violently. Philip loses control, and the scene spills into public view. The dialogue reported by later tradition shouldn't be taken word for word, but the fact is clear. The dynastic conflict breaks into the open. From that moment, the court is no longer united. On one side are Philip, Attalus, and the new queen, Cleopatra Eurydice. On the other are Alexander and Olympias, who see their position threatened. That's the paradox of Philip's success. Just when the kingdom looks stronger than ever, its center becomes unstable. The Persian campaign is close, but before the army can even depart, the king has to face an open succession crisis. After Chaeronea, the enemy is no longer outside. It's already inside the palace. After the wedding banquet, the break becomes real. Olympias leaves Macedonia and returns to Epirus, to her family. Alexander withdraws from court and spends time in Illyria as well. It's a turning point. The heir who, until recently, looked like Philip's natural successor is no longer at the center of power. His status remains, but it is no longer guaranteed. In the months that follow, father and son reconcile, but only on the surface. In public, they appear united again, while the court keeps splitting into factions. In this climate, a lesser-known but historically important episode appears, the Pixodaros affair. Pixodaros, satrap of Caria, seeks a marriage alliance with a Macedonian royal house and offers his daughter to Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother. Aridaeus isn't the favorite in the succession, but the fact that he's being used in a negotiation at this level is enough to set off alarm. If Philip is positioning another son through diplomacy, then the line of succession can truly change. Alexander decides to intervene personally and sends trusted men to derail the arrangement and offer himself as the bridegroom instead. Philip's reaction is harsh. He blocks the negotiation, rebukes his son, and cracks down on Alexander's circle. Some companions, including Ptolemy, Nearchus, Harpalus, Arigius, and Laomedon, are driven from court. One thing is clear: Alexander is no longer just a hot-headed young man nursing wounded pride. He is already a player in international diplomacy, and Macedonia's dynastic crisis is now a geopolitical question that reaches into Asia Minor and the Persian sphere. In 336 BC, at least in public, the family presents itself as united. Philip is at the height of his prestige. The expedition against Persia is ready, and Macedonia appears stronger than ever. But the question of the heir is not resolved. Beneath the image of stability, the succession fight continues. In public, father and son appear united again, but now the real conflict lies elsewhere. Public image no longer matters. The royal house is split, and a blade is enough to change history. In 336 BC, Philip II is assassinated in front of the entire Macedonian court. In an instant, power changes hands. Alexander is only 20 years old, and the kingdom he inherits is anything but stable. Behind him is a divided dynasty. Around him, powerful, ambitious generals. Ahead of him, a Greece waiting for the right moment to rebel. Philip's death doesn't bring an orderly succession. Alexander has to move fast, eliminate rivals, consolidate power in Macedon, and above all, prove he's more than an heir. Because in the Macedonian world, being born king isn't enough. You have to assert yourself as one. And when Greece tests the new king, Alexander answers with a decision that changes everything. But how does a 20-year-old turn a succession crisis into absolute rule? By 336 BC, Philip is at the height of his power. He has imposed his dominance over most of Greece and is already preparing an expedition against Persia. The celebrations at Aigai, the ancient dynastic capital of the Macedonians, are meant to showcase exactly that: a strong kingdom, a stable dynasty. The occasion is the marriage between Cleopatra, Philip's daughter, and Alexander of Epirus, Olympias's brother. It's a public, solemn ceremony staged before the Macedonian elite and representatives from Greece. Philip steps forward in full view as a ruler without rivals. And that's when Pausanias appears. He's a somatophylax, one of the king's bodyguards. The sources point, first, to a personal vendetta. Pausanias believes he was wronged by the men close to Attalus, one of Philip's leading generals and a central figure in the new faction tied to Cleopatra Eurydice. He accuses the king of denying him justice. But Attalus represents more than a private feud. Philip's new marriage to Cleopatra Eurydice could produce, in the eyes of the court, an heir considered more fully Macedonian. And that heir could threaten Alexander, the son of an Epirot princess. And that tension doesn't come out of nowhere. A few months earlier, at the wedding banquet for Philip and Cleopatra Eurydice, the rift had already exploded in front of the entire court. Attalus raised a toast to the birth of a legitimate heir, openly hinting that Alexander, Olympias's son, might not be legitimate enough. Alexander reacts in anger. Philip, drunk, tries to intervene, but stumbles and falls in front of everyone. It's humiliating and it makes one thing clear: the succession is no longer certain. Not long after, Olympias leaves the court. Alexander withdraws as well. The dynastic rift is now wide open, and when Philip dies, that simmering tension becomes a real crisis. Ancient writers suspect there was more behind the attack. Olympias' name comes up often. Alexander's far less, and his direct involvement is not proven. Pausanias strikes and tries to flee, but he's killed almost immediately. And that matters. With the assassin dead, many answers die with him. Now the question is, who will take power? Alexander is about 20. He is proclaimed king by the Macedonian assembly and the army. In Macedon, blood helps, but it isn't enough. A king has to be recognized by his own men. Then come the funerals at Aigai, the sacred heart of the Macedonian dynasty, solemnly closing the age of Philip. After the acclamation, Alexander understands one thing immediately: inheriting the throne isn't enough. In Macedon, there is no fully settled dynastic system. He has to prove he's firmly in command and that no challengers remain. One rival is Amyntas IV, son of Perdiccas III, the older brother of Philip II. In theory, he's the last direct representative of the line that could have claimed the throne. The young king has him executed. More complicated is the case of the Licentians, a powerful noble family from Upper Macedonia. Some are dealt with immediately, especially because their names surface among the suspicions surrounding Philip's murder. Alexander of Licentius, however, is spared, at least for the moment, perhaps for political convenience. According to Justin, he was among the first to recognize Alexander as king. Then there's Attalus, one of Philip's leading generals, the uncle of Cleopatra Eurydice, and a man with contacts in Athens. He isn't dangerous only because of his personal prestige. He's dangerous because he could become a rallying point for anyone who wants to reopen the question of succession. And he's already in Asia Minor with a Macedonian advance force. For Alexander, leaving him alive is too great a risk, so Attalus is put to death as well. Olympias moves in parallel. The sources describe her as ruthless toward Cleopatra Eurydice and her young daughter, having them killed. The new reign is consolidated with an internal settling of scores. Once his control in Macedon is secure, the young king turns to Greece. In Thessaly, his opponents try to block his path at Tempe, between Mount Olympus and Mount Ossa. Alexander avoids a head-on clash, takes the army along a tougher route, and appears behind the Thessalian barrier. That maneuver is enough. The Thessalians submit and recognize him as their leader. From there, he moves down toward Thermopylae, the unavoidable gateway into central Greece. Control that corridor, and you control access to the south. Alexander occupies it without needing a major pitched battle, and he immediately strengthens his position in the Panhellenic order. The next stop is Corinth. Here, he's reaffirmed as leader of the League of Corinth, the alliance Philip built to hold together almost all the Greek city-states and lead the war against Persia. Sparta stays out, but the rest of the system holds. By the end of 336 BC, he's no longer only king of Macedon. He's already Philip's political successor in Greece. In 335 BC, Alexander has been king for only a few months, but his rule still isn't secure. To the north and west, raids by the Thracians, the Triballi, and the Illyrians destabilize Macedon. So he launches his first independent campaign with a clear goal: to secure the frontiers. He leaves Amphipolis and marches northeast into territory controlled by Thracian tribes. He faces the Thracians first. The Macedonian army advances with roughly 15,000 to 20,000 men, infantry and cavalry, against tribal groups that are numerous but less organized. They cross the Haemus Range, where the Thracians try to block the pass by pushing wagons down the slope into the Macedonian line. Alexander holds formation, absorbs the impact, and counterattacks. He forces the pass and proves something right away. The new king can fight on rough ground, not only on open plains. Then he turns against the Triballi. He defeats them on the Liginus River and drives his army all the way to the Ister, the great Danube. There he crosses at night, attacks the Geti on the far bank, and forces them to retreat. This isn't just a border raid. It's a show of force beyond the usual limits of Macedonian control. After the fighting on the Ister comes more serious news. To the west, the Illyrians are on the move. The Macedonian army swings towards Pelion, where Alexander faces Cletus, son of Bardylus, and Glaucius of the Talanti. They command larger forces, probably between 20,000 and 30,000 men. It's one of the most dangerous moments of his first campaign. The terrain is against him, a narrow valley ringed by heights held by the enemy. The Macedonians are down on the valley floor with a very real risk of being surrounded and cut off. Alexander doesn't lose control. He keeps his formation tight and maneuvers under pressure, preventing panic. He manages to disengage without breaking up the army, then waits for the right moment. When the enemy disperses, he strikes again. He hits decisively and shatters the coalition. Here you can see what he inherits from his father and what is uniquely his: the same strategic ruthlessness, but even greater speed and a higher appetite for risk. But just as Alexander is winning in the Balkans, in Greece, some people are already starting to believe he's dead. While Alexander is still campaigning in Illyria, a persistent rumor spreads through Greece. The new king is dead, or has suffered a crushing defeat. It's the news many have been waiting for. If Alexander can't return, the system Philip imposed could collapse with him. The first to react is Thebes. The city rises up, recalls the exiles, besieges the Macedonian garrison trapped in the Theban citadel, and tries to reignite a broader Greek revolt. The rebellion grows out of three forces coming together: hatred of Macedonian control, the desire to erase the order Philip built, and the conviction that his son has neither the time nor the strength to intervene. In Athens, anti-Macedonian voices reemerge. The city sympathizes with Thebes, listens to Demosthenes, and follows events closely, but hesitates to commit all the way. No one wants to end up on the wrong side if Alexander turns out to be alive. And this is where the young king shows his resolve. From Illyria, he marches south at a speed that shocks the Greek world. He reaches Thessaly in 7 days, and just 6 days later, he's already in Boeotia. The news of his arrival almost outruns his army. Thebes rebelled counting on distance. Alexander erases that advantage. When he appears outside the city, Alexander doesn't attack right away. He brings a force of roughly 30,000 infantry and 3,000 cavalry. The Macedonian corps is 6 taxis of the phalanx, about 9,000 phalangites, supported by light infantry. Inside Thebes, the rebels may be able to muster 12,000 to 15,000 men, but not all are troops of the same quality. And the Macedonian garrison in the Cadmea is still there, besieged, but not defeated. Thebes is still a major city in central Greece, with a population in the tens of thousands, but its alliances are fragile. Athens sympathizes and sends weapons. Sparta moves only as far as the Isthmus of Corinth, and no one manages to turn political support into a real relief army. Alexander knows it, so he offers surrender again, leaves an exit open, and tries to separate the rebels from the rest of the city. At this point, the message is clear. If Thebes is destroyed, it won't be blind impulse. It will be a deliberate calculation. After negotiations fail, the assault begins, perhaps early on Perdiccas' initiative, and quickly turns into a coordinated attack. Macedonian troops press from the outside, while the garrison in the Cadmea moves from within. For Thebes, that means fighting on two fronts at once. When part of the defensive line collapses, the battle spills into the streets and turns into urban combat. From that moment, the revolt is lost. The number the sources repeat most is often stark. More than 6,000 Thebans are killed. The survivors, with few exceptions, are sold into slavery. Much of the city is leveled. Temples and sacred places are spared. Even the house of Pindar, the most famous poet of Thebes, is left standing. It's a striking contrast. Culture and religion are spared, while the city's political life is erased. Alexander is sending a very clear message. Thebes is the first major rebellion against his power. Destroying the city is meant to paralyze the rest of Greece before it even thinks about rising against him. The contrast with Athens is decisive. Athens is not annihilated. Alexander treats it far more cautiously, for the prestige it still holds in the Greek world, for its political usefulness, and above all, for its fleet, which will prove valuable in the war against Persia. At Thebes, he uses terror. With Athens, he uses caution. The effect is immediate. The formal decision on Thebes' fate is put before the Council of the Greeks. Macedonian garrisons remain in key places: Corinth, Chalcis, and the Cadmea itself. The road to Asia is finally open. Thebes burns. Athens backs down. Greece falls silent. Now, Alexander is no longer just Philip's son. He's the man who terrorized Greece, and now he can turn toward Persia. In 334 BC, Alexander crosses the Hellespont with barely 37,000 men. Ahead of him stands the Persian Empire, richer, larger, and stronger. In Asia, he doesn't find Darius. He finds satraps, fleets, fortresses, and an entire system built to stop him. At Granicus, he nearly dies. At Issus, he drives Darius into flight. And in between, he learns one hard truth. Victory means dismantling Persia, not just chasing Darius across Asia. So how does a 20-year-old king turn one landing in Asia into the beginning of Persia's end? In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander leaves Europe for Asia with an army of about 37,000 men, roughly 32,000 infantry, and just over 5,000 cavalry. Before he departs, tradition says he gives away much of his property to his companions. When they ask what he's keeping for himself, he answers, hope. But this expedition isn't driven by glory alone. Alexander is continuing Philip's project, presenting himself as a leader of the Greek world against Persia and seeking prestige, plunder, and long-term political stability. Taking the war into Asia also keeps both the army and Greece focused firmly east. What he's facing is no ordinary kingdom. It's the Persian Empire, a state of perhaps 25 to 35 million people, compared with roughly 4 to 6 million in mainland Greece. It's an immense system, organized into satrapies, able to raise taxes, troops, and resources on a continental scale. Militarily, the gap is just as stark. Persia can mobilize armies of up to 100,000 men. In short, Alexander is attacking an empire vastly larger than his own kingdom. The main crossing is between Sestos and Abydos, barely 2.5 miles apart. Most of the army makes passage on about 160 triremes and transport ships, but Alexander turns even this crossing into a political and symbolic act. At Elaeus, he honors Protesilaus, the first Greek to die after landing in Asia in the Trojan War. The message is obvious. He wants his own landing to be luckier. And the instant he touches Asian soil, he hurls a spear into the ground, as if the conquest begins with that first step. Next comes Ilium, ancient Troy, about 19 miles from Abydos. At Ilium, Alexander doesn't act like a tourist. He's trying to step into myth. He offers a sacrifice to Athena, lays his own arms in the temple, and visits Achilles' tomb. Hephaestion honors Patroclus. None of it is accidental. Alexander is telling himself, his men, and the Greek world that his war in Asia begins where their greatest war, the Trojan War, began. Alexander enters Asia not just as a conqueror, but determined to rewrite history. At first, Alexander doesn't face Darius. He faces the satraps and commanders of Asia Minor. Before the clash, the Persian leadership gathers at Zelea, and Memnon of Rhodes emerges as the clearest mind in the room. He argues against an immediate battle. Instead, he wants to strip the land bare, deny the Macedonians food and fodder, and wear Alexander down on land, then exploit Persian superiority at sea. Soon after, at Miletus, the Persian fleet can field about 400 ships against roughly 160 for the Greeks. Memnon has grasped the war's central point, but his plan is rejected. The satraps choose to fight at once, and it will prove a mistake. In late May 334 BC, the two armies meet on the Granicus River, about 60 miles from Troy. The river isn't wide, but its banks are steep, sometimes 10 to 13 feet high. A frontal attack means scrambling up under direct enemy fire. Alexander does it anyway, throwing himself into the melee. The sources stress the point. He fights in person, and the battle nearly costs him his life. He's struck on the head and almost cut down from behind, until Cletus the Black steps in and saves him. It's the kind of moment that turns instantly into legend. After the victory, the Persian hold on the region starts to crack. Alexander sends 300 Persian suits of armor to Athens, dedicated to all the Greeks except the Spartans, a propaganda move. Then the Persian structure in Western Asia Minor begins to collapse. Duscalium is evacuated. Sardis surrenders without a fight. Mithranes, the garrison commander, hands over the city, the citadel, and the treasury. You can already see Alexander's two sides: the warrior king who nearly dies in the river, and the politician who turns a tactical win into the opening of Western Asia Minor. After the Granicus, Alexander turns to the sea. If Persia keeps the Aegean ports, the expedition remains exposed. So he goes from Sardis to Ephesus, calls back the exiles, tears down the pro-Persian oligarchy, and restores democracy. In Ephesus, liberation and conquest coincide. Alexander replaces local elites with an order loyal to him. From Ephesus, he marches south towards Miletus, about 28 miles away. And there, his strategy comes into focus. The Greek fleet holds the island of Lad with about 160 ships. 3 days later, the Persian fleet arrives with 400. The balance of power at sea is stark, roughly 2.5 to 1 in Persia's favor. Parmenion proposes risking a naval battle. Alexander refuses. He knows he is weaker at sea, and he decides to defeat the Persian fleet on land by taking away its ports, arsenals, anchorages, and allied cities. It is a crucial choice. From this point on, the campaign is no longer a sequence of battles, but a systemic war against the Achaemenid Empire. He then moves on to Halicarnassus, about 35 miles from Miletus. Here, he launches the expedition's first major siege. Defending the city is Memnon of Rhodes, the most capable commander serving Persia in Asia Minor. The resistance is fierce. Fighting turns urban and comes in brutal waves until parts of the city burn and the Persian defensive system in the region finally breaks. This is where Ada of Caria enters the story. She hands him Olinda, adopts him as her son, and after the capture of Halicarnassus, she is restored as governor. Alexander understands that military victory alone is not enough. He must also appear legitimate. To stabilize Caria, he leaves behind 3,000 infantry and 200 cavalry. Yet the war is far from over. Memnon escapes and carries the conflict into the Aegean, where Persia remains strong. Darius gives him command of the fleet and the whole coastline. Memnon seizes Chios and moves to Lesbos, where he lays siege to the northern city of Mytilene. After Halicarnassus, Alexander continues along the coast of Lycia and Pamphylia to block every anchorage. Telemussus, Xanthus, Patara, and Phaselis are drawn into his system. It's a deliberate choice. Control the southern coast of Asia Minor and make the enemy fleet unusable. In winter, he reaches Gordium in Phrygia. It's not only a new stage of the campaign, but a symbol. In the citadel stands the famous cart of Gordius, tied with a knot that tradition says only the man destined to rule Asia can loosen. The best-known version says Alexander cuts it with his sword. With that gesture, he casts himself as the man destiny has chosen to open Asia's road. At Gordium, reinforcements arrive. About 3,000 infantry, 300 cavalry, 200 Thessalians, and 150 Eleans. Alexander passes through Anchria, crosses Cappadocia, goes beyond the Halys River, and heads for the Cilician gates. He takes them with a night march so swift that the Persian garrison flees. He then moves towards Cilicia across the Anatolian plateau and the mountain passes, more than 285 miles in a straight line. And at Tarsus, the most unexpected blow comes. Alexander, exhausted by the march and perhaps after plunging into the icy Cydnus, falls gravely ill. The doctors think him lost, except Philip the Acarnanian, who prepares a remedy. At that moment, a letter arrives from Parmenion, one of his generals, warning that the doctor may be bribed by the enemy. It's not certainty, only suspicion. Alexander chooses to trust anyway. He takes the cup, drinks the medicine, and at the same time hands Philip the letter so he can read it. It's a powerful scene. It doesn't prove Philip is a traitor, it proves the opposite. And it shows how Alexander is willing to risk everything, even when the threat doesn't come from the battlefield. At this point, the war shifts. Until now, Alexander has beaten satraps, garrisons, and coastal cities. Now, however, the great king truly enters the story, Darius himself. Before that, something decisive happens. In 333 BC, Memnon of Rhodes dies, the best Persian strategist at sea. With him, Persia loses its clearest strategist. And from that point onward, the war passes more directly into Darius's own hands. The Persian king moves down towards Syria with a great royal army. Ancient sources give enormous figures, 300,000, even 600,000 men. They are clearly exaggerated. Even so, Darius still commands forces far superior to Alexander. A deserter, Amyntas, warns him, it's better to force Alexander to fight in open country where numbers really make the difference. But Darius chooses differently. He chooses the Achaemenid gates, outflanks the army, and finds himself in Alexander's rear. He takes Issus, where the Persians capture and kill the sick it left behind. At that point, the situation reverses. Alexander is no longer advancing toward the enemy because the enemy is now behind him. The two armies are forced to turn and face each other. Between Tarsus and Issus lie about 75 miles, but the decisive point is not the distance. It is the ground. Before the Pinaris, between the sea and the heights, the space narrows. And in that narrow space, much of the Persian numerical advantage is squeezed out. Alexander understands it immediately. On the left, near the sea, Parmenion, the most experienced commander in his army, comes under heavy pressure. On the right, Alexander strengthens the striking wing, angles part of the line toward the heights, and then attacks decisively toward the Persian center. This is the key moment. Around Darius fights his closest men, the king's kinsmen and part of the Persian guard. But when the Macedonian attack reaches the center, not even that chosen corps can hold. The great king loses the field. He flees, first by chariot and then on horseback, leaving behind his bow, shield, cloak, and royal chariot. When the battle is over, Alexander visits the wounded, honors the dead, and then treats Darius' family with respect. The mother, wife, and children retain their rank. Tradition preserves an episode. Sisygambis, Darius' mother, mistakes Hephaestion for Alexander because he is taller. Alexander does not humiliate her. He reassures her. It is a small detail, but it matters. He is no longer only the avenger of the Greeks. He begins to look like a claimant to the throne of Asia. Yet the war is not finished. Darius is alive. The Persian fleet is still in play, and the Achaemenid Empire has not collapsed. The choice now is different. Pursue the fleeing king, or conquer his empire piece by piece. Alexander has won at Issus. He has driven the great king of Persia into flight. But the war is not over. Darius still holds power across his empire, and above all, at sea. As long as command of the sea remains in enemy hands, every victory can still be undone. So Alexander makes a surprising decision. He will not chase the king. Not yet. First, he will strip Persia of command of the sea. Ahead of him stands Tyre, an island city guarded by water, high walls, and its own strong, well-armed fleet. To take it, he must attempt something no army has ever dared. And when he succeeds, the war will never be the same. But how do you take a city everyone thinks is impregnable? After the victory at Issus, Alexander has not yet won the war. Darius III is still alive, even after a severe defeat. He is the last recognized Achaemenid great king, who took the throne in 336 BC, and he still rules an empire stretching more than 2,500 miles, from the Aegean to the lands of the Indus. It is a world far larger than Greece. The dynasty had ruled for more than 2 centuries. It began with Cyrus the Great, who in the 6th century BC united the Persians and conquered Lydia and Babylon. Under Darius I, the Achaemenid system reached its full form. The king consolidated the empire, organized it into satrapies, strengthened a road network of more than 1,550 miles, and made it possible for messages and orders to move across the empire in days. Persian rule stretched from the lands of the Indus to the Aegean. After Issus, Persia loses prestige, but not its strength. Satrapies, money, manpower, and immense territorial depth remain. The empire can still field major armies, around 90,000 men, with a powerful cavalry arm. Above all, it still has a naval network based on Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Egypt, able to put roughly 300 to 400 warships to sea. Alexander, by contrast, commands only about 37,000 men in all. This is where Alexander makes a crucial decision. Instead of pursuing Darius immediately toward Babylon, nearly 620 miles away, he turns south along the coast. The choice is strategic. If he marches inland with Tyre, Cyprus, and Egypt still behind him, he leaves Persia in command of the sea, with a power to strike his rear and even reopen the war in Greece. Alexander sees it clearly. Before he can chase the great king, he must strip the empire of its naval bases in the Levant. The first Phoenician cities yield with hardly a fight. Byblos surrenders. Sidon opens its gates, helped by its inhabitants' hostility toward Persian rule. But when Alexander reaches Tyre, he finds something different. Tyre is an island city, separated from the coast by about half a mile of sea, protected by its walls and a fleet that in some reconstructions may have numbered around 70 to 80 warships. Alexander asks to enter the city to sacrifice to Melkart, the Tyrian god whom the Greeks identify with Heracles. It is not just a religious gesture. For Alexander, it means presenting himself as the legitimate ruler before the most powerful city in Phoenicia. The Tyrians refuse. They accept every other request, but not the entry of the Macedonians or Persians inside the walls. From then on, siege is unavoidable. Tyre is unlike any city Alexander has faced. It is a fortified island, cut off from the coast and defended by several thousand men. Its sea-facing walls rise to about 150 feet. For centuries, its strength has come from one fact above all: the sea. For Alexander, however, Tyre is an obstacle he cannot leave behind. If it stays in enemy hands, the Persian fleet keeps a foothold in the heart of the Levant. So he makes a decision that will become legendary. He orders his men to build a mole from the coast to the island. At first, it seems possible. Near the shore, the water is shallow. But the farther the men advance, the deeper it becomes. Near the city, it reaches more than 16 feet. The work turns brutal. Stone, earth, mud, currents, arrows, and attacks from Tyrian ships. In the end, the mole stretches about half a mile, built under the defenders' fire. Tradition says Alexander dreams of Heracles, who takes him by the hand and leads him into Tyre. The seer Aristander interprets the dream. The city will fall, but with difficulty. The prophecy will prove accurate. The Tyrians react at once. They launch a fire ship against the mole, destroying the towers and structures. For a moment, everything seems lost. Alexander persists. He widens the mole and tightens the siege. The balance begins to shift. About 80 Phoenician ships and 120 Cypriot ships go over to his side. From then on, Tyre is besieged by land and sea. During the siege, another offer from Darius arrives: 10,000 talents, one daughter in marriage, and all lands west of the Euphrates. Parmenion says he would accept it if he were Alexander. Alexander replies that he too would accept, if he were Parmenion. The war is no longer just Greek revenge. It is now a struggle for mastery of Asia. After about 7 months of siege, Tyre falls. The capture is brutal. Thousands of defenders are killed. About 30,000 inhabitants are enslaved, and about 2,000 prisoners are crucified along the coast. Strategically, the result is enormous. Alexander has broken one of Persia's principal naval centers for good. Yet the mole does not disappear after the siege ends. Over time, it hardens and changes the city's geography forever. Sea currents begin depositing sand and silt against the structure, strengthening it and widening it through centuries. Tyre, once an island, becomes a peninsula, and remains one to this day. After Tyre, Alexander continues south. The Phoenician coast has been broken open, but the road to Egypt is not yet clear. Between him and the Nile still stands Gaza, the last fortress of the southern Lebanon. Gaza is not just a transit city. It is an important commercial hub set between the Mediterranean, the desert, and the caravan routes to Arabia. It has about 15,000 inhabitants and stands 2.5 miles from the sea, built on an artificial mound about 80 feet above the surrounding ground. This makes it extremely hard to besiege. From below, Macedonian siege engines cannot strike the walls with any real effect. Defending it is Battus, the city's governor. He has gathered supplies, mercenaries, and about 6,000 men, enough to resist for a long time. After Tyre, Alexander finds another city ready to defy him. To take Gaza, he must reshape the ground with major engineering works. He orders siege ramps built around the city to bring towers and engines up to wall height. At Tyre, he had turned sea into land. At Gaza, he must lift the earth up to the city. During the siege, an omen appears. According to tradition, a bird drops a stone near Alexander. The seer Aristander reads the sign. The city will fall, but the king must expose himself to danger. Shortly afterward, Alexander is wounded in the shoulder during the fighting. Despite the resistance, Gaza falls after a very hard siege. The capture is violent. Many defenders are killed, while much of the population, including women and children, is sold into slavery. Governor Battus is captured and punished with extreme, deliberate cruelty. The city is not razed, but the message is clear. Resistance means paying a terrible price. Now the last gate toward Egypt lies fully open. Alexander crosses northern Sinai and reaches Pelusium in about 7 days. The city controls the eastern entrance to the Nile Delta. Whoever passes through it can enter the very heart of Egypt. But Egypt does not prepare for long resistance. The Persian satrap Mazaches sees that the situation has changed. The Levantine coast is lost, Darius is far away, and the Macedonian army stands at the gates. So Egypt is handed over without a major battle. For Alexander, this is a turning point. In Phoenicia and Gaza, he had needed sieges. In Egypt, he enters as a liberator from Persian rule. He does not ravage the country or insult its cults. He does the opposite. He respects them and presents himself as a legitimate ruler. From Pelusium, he moves towards Memphis, the ancient Nile capital. There, he offers sacrifices to Apis and the Egyptian gods. It is a powerful gesture. Alexander does not want to appear as an occupier. He wants to be recognized as pharaoh, the man replacing the Persians without destroying Egyptian order. Then he looks toward the western Nile Delta, between the Mediterranean and the Lake Mareotis, near the island of Pharos. He identifies the perfect site for founding a new city, Alexandria in Egypt. This is no whim. It is an imperial project. Alexandria is founded to control the sea, the delta, and the trade routes between Egypt, the Mediterranean, and the East. It is at once a naval base, a port, and a political symbol. Tradition preserves a detail. To mark the outline of the future city, the Macedonians use barley because no other suitable material is at hand. The seers interpret the act as an omen of abundance. In this case, history will prove them right. From that line traced in the sand, one of the ancient world's most important cities will rise. Before it lies the island of Pharos. Centuries later, a lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders, will stand there. Alexandria will also become one of the Mediterranean's great centers of learning with its library. It is not merely a city. It is a project meant to endure. And even today, it still bears the young conqueror's name. After founding Alexandria, the young king makes a decision that seems irrational in wartime. Instead of turning back at once toward Darius, he pushes farther west along the coast and then enters the Libyan desert. His destination is the oasis of Siwa, seat of the oracle of Ammon, the Egyptian god whom the Greeks identify with Zeus. The journey is no simple religious detour. Alexander wants to consult a sanctuary, but also to measure himself against 2 models linked to his own heroic image, Heracles and Perseus. Both, according to tradition, had reached Ammon. If he wants to stand beside them, he must take that road too. But Siwa is not near. From the coast to the oasis, the route crosses hundreds of miles of desert. Heat, sand, thirst, and the risk of losing direction become real enemies. During the march, the army risks losing its way. Some traditions tell of sudden rain saving the march, others of ravens marking the route. The details change, but the meaning remains. Even during the journey, Alexander appears protected by something greater. When he reaches Siwa, he consults the oracle. We do not know exactly what was said. One tradition preserves a detail. The priest addresses him as "my son." Alexander interprets the words as "son of Zeus." What matters here is less what the oracle truly says than what Alexander can make others believe it said. After Siwa, Alexander can present himself differently. In Macedonia, he is king. For the Greeks, he is still the avenger against Persia. In Egypt, he is pharaoh. But now, after the oracle of Ammon, his image rises higher still. Not only a ruler by right of conquest, but a man chosen by the gods. When he leaves Egypt, the eastern Mediterranean no longer shields Persia as it once did. Tyre has fallen, Gaza has yielded, Egypt is in his hands. Alexandria has been founded, and Siwa has given his power a new dimension. Now Alexander can turn back east, not merely to pursue Darius, but to seize the empire's heart itself. Alexander has already won impossible battles, but now he faces the decisive test. At Gaugamela, Darius chooses the ground, prepares the plain, and deploys everything he has: scythed chariots, cavalry, elephants. This time, he means to stop Alexander by destroying him completely. If Alexander loses, the dream of Greek revenge ends there. If he wins, he seizes Persia's imperial heart. But defeating Darius is only the beginning, because after Gaugamela, Alexander is no longer just conquering Persia. He is trying to become its new ruler. But what price must he pay to become king of Asia? After leaving Egypt, Alexander turns back toward the northeast. He crosses Syria again and heads for Mesopotamia. The sea is no longer the main strategic problem. Tyre has fallen. Gaza has been subdued. Egypt is in his hands, and the Persian fleet has lost much of its network of bases in the eastern Mediterranean. Now the war shifts inland. The center of the struggle moves toward the great rivers and cities of Achaemenid power: the Euphrates, the Tigris, Babylon, Susa, Persepolis. In 331 BC, Alexander reaches Thapsacus on the Euphrates. There he finds two boat bridges already started but not finished. Macedonia is guarding the river with about 3,000 horsemen. When the Macedonian army approaches, Macedonia withdraws. Alexander crosses the Euphrates and continues east. Then comes the Tigris. The crossing is harder, the current is strong, and yet even here, Darius still avoids direct battle. Meanwhile, the king tries diplomacy. He offers peace, territory, and dynastic marriage. Alexander refuses. Tradition gives him a memorable line: "There cannot be two suns in the sky, nor two kings in Asia." Whether authentic or not, it sums up the point. Alexander does not want part of the empire. He wants everything. Shortly before the battle, an unsettling sign appears: a lunar eclipse. Many in the army see it as a dark omen. The diviners, however, turn it into a favorable message. The battle will come within a month, and Alexander will win. Darius does not defend the rivers and still seeks a diplomatic solution. But at the same time, he is choosing the battlefield. Darius has learned from Issus. There, he had fought in a narrow space between sea and mountains, and his numerical advantage had been trapped by the terrain. At Gaugamela, about 55 to 60 miles from Arbela, Darius chooses a broad, open plain. Here, he can use what Persia has in abundance: space. cavalry, chariots, and numbers. The ground is prepared in advance. The plain is leveled to make movement easier for the scythed chariots. War vehicles fitted with side blades, meant to tear openings in the Macedonian line. Darius deploys about 200 of them. He also has about 15 elephants, more impressive than decisive, but useful for projecting Persian military power. Alexander arrives with about 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. Darius still commands far greater forces, although exact ancient figures are exaggerated. This time, however, numbers alone do not decide the battle. The ground does. The night before the battle, Parmenion proposes a night attack. Alexander refuses. He does not want victory won in darkness. He wants Darius defeated in front of everyone, in daylight. It is a proud answer, but also a political one. If the great king falls in open battle, no one can say he was beaten by deception. According to tradition, before the battle, Alexander also sacrifices to Phobos, god of fear. It is a powerful detail. It does not suggest weakness, but awareness of risk. At stake is not just the battle. It is the right to rule Asia. On October 1, 331 BC, both armies deploy. Darius occupies the center, surrounded by his royal guard and loyal units. Alexander places the phalanx in the center, Parmenion on the left, and the striking wing on the right, with the companion cavalry. The decisive maneuver begins on the Macedonian right. Alexander does not attack the center immediately. He moves gradually to the right with the companions and light troops, as if trying to move off the ground Darius has prepared for the chariots and the Persian mounted wing. Darius cannot allow it. If Alexander leaves the leveled zone, the scythed chariots lose effectiveness and the entire Persian plan could collapse. He orders the cavalry of his left wing to follow and contain him. The farther the Persians stretch outward, the thinner and more fragile their line becomes. Between the wing pursuing Alexander and the center, where Darius stands, a gap opens. The scythed chariots are sent forward, but the Macedonians are ready. They open lanes, let them pass, and strike them from the sides with light infantry and javelins. The weapon meant to sow panic fails to decide the battle. On the left, Parmenion comes under pressure, and Alexander has to halt to restore order to the line. At that moment, he sees what he has been looking for: a gap to strike Darius directly. He does not try to destroy Persia's army. He sends the companions against Darius in shock formation, where the phalanx advances behind them. For the great king of Persia, this is the decisive moment. If he stays, he risks destruction. Darius flees, and when he leaves the field, the battle is decided. After Gaugamela, Persia does not vanish in a day, but it stops functioning as a power capable of stopping Alexander. Darius flees towards Media. Alexander, however, chooses a different path. He does not pursue him immediately. First, he enters the cities that keep Achaemenid power standing. The first is Babylon. The city opens its gates without a major battle. It is a political handover more than a military surrender. Alexander enters as the new sovereign, respects local cults, and understands that governing Asia means controlling symbols, aristocracies, and administration. At Alexander's side is Hephaestion, his closest companion. While many Macedonians view this transformation with suspicion, Hephaestion remains firmly with the king. From Babylon, he heads for Susa, an imperial capital. The city falls without serious resistance, But the real blow is the treasure, about 50,000 talents. With it, he pays the army, funds new campaigns, and sends about 3,000 talents to Antipater in Europe. Before he reaches the symbolic capital, however, there is an obstacle. The Persian Gates, a mountain pass defended by Ariobarzanes, satrap of Persis. Here, Alexander runs into serious trouble for the first time after Gaugamela. The pass is narrow. Defenders strike from above, and the advance stalls. With help from a local guide, he finds a secondary route, and with a night march, outflanks the Persian position. At dawn, he attacks from behind while other troops attack from the front. The clash is hard, but decisive. The Persian line breaks. Sources differ on whether Ariobarzanes is killed or withdrawn. The road to Persepolis is open. Persepolis is not just any city. It is the monumental stage of Achaemenid kingship, the place where Persian power displays itself in its most solemn form. Here, Alexander finds an even greater treasure. According to tradition, up to 120,000 talents, wealth almost unimaginable for a Greek polis. Yet Persepolis also becomes the place of destruction. The royal palace burns. Revenge for Athens? A political gesture? The excesses of a banquet? Perhaps a combination of all three. It remains one of the most controversial episodes of Alexander's life. After Persepolis, Alexander returns to the problem he can no longer postpone. Darius still lives. Darius flees east, but he is no longer the ruler of an intact empire. He carries what remains of his kingship. According to tradition, about 7,000 talents, 3,000 horsemen, and 6,000 infantry. He is still king of Persia, but by now he is also a fugitive. From Persepolis, Alexander moves back toward Ecbatana, then toward the Caspian Gates and the eastern regions, as far as Bactria and Sogdiana. The war changes form. No longer great battles, but pursuit, forced marches, and ever more remote territories. But Darius is not fleeing alone. Beside him are nobles and satraps who no longer believe he can save the empire. Among them is Bessus, satrap of Bactria, one of the strongest men in the Persian East. He understands that Darius no longer has the strength to hold the empire together. At that point, the great king is betrayed. Darius is arrested by his own men. When Alexander approaches, the conspirators decide he cannot be left alive. They wound him mortally and flee eastward. Alexander arrives too late. He fails to capture Darius alive, but Darius' death gives him a political opportunity. Alexander no longer presents himself as the only man who defeated the Persian king. He now appears as the one who avenges him. Alexander orders royal honors for Darius. The body is treated with respect. The message is clear. Alexander no longer wants to be merely the king of the Macedonians against Persia. He wants to appear as the legitimate successor to Persian power. But the war goes on. Bessus proclaims himself king under the name Artaxerxes. He wears the symbols of Persian kingship and claims Darius' inheritance. But his power is fragile. He is not recognized as great king by the entire empire. For many, he remains above all one thing: the traitor who delivered Darius to death. Even before the struggle with Bessus is over, a crisis erupts inside the Macedonian army. The first signal is the Philotas affair. Armenian's son is accused of failing to report a conspiracy against the king. He belongs to one of the army's most powerful families, but he is tried before the Macedonian assembly, condemned, and killed. But the blow does not stop with him. Soon after, Philotas' father, Parmenion, is killed as well. He is far away in Ecbatana, where he controls troops, money, and a strategic position. Perhaps Alexander fears rebellion after Philotas' death. Perhaps he believes he cannot leave Parmenion alive. In any case, the decision is brutal. The man who served Philip and led the Macedonian wing in decisive battles is put to death. External conquest now becomes an internal settling of accounts. Only afterward does Alexander pursue Bessus. He too was betrayed by his men, captured, and handed to the Macedonians. The punishment is brutal. He is mutilated, then executed as a usurper and murderer of the great king. But the East does not surrender with him. In Sogdiana, local leaders like Spitamenes turn the war into ambushes, revolts, and pursuits. The Macedonian army has to split up, chase rebels, garrison cities, found new bases, and control distant regions ever farther from Macedonia. Then comes an even deeper wound. Cletus the Black. He is the man who saved Alexander's life at the Granicus. Without him, the expedition could have ended there. Years later, during a banquet, Cletus openly criticizes the king in front of everyone. He accuses Alexander of forgetting the Macedonians, exalting the Persians too much, and overshadowing Philip and the old companions. Wine, pride, and rage do the rest. Alexander loses control and kills him with his own hands. It is a dramatic moment. The man who saved his life dies at his hands. From here, the fracture is no longer merely political. It is now personal. Alexander seeks to rule as king of Asia. He adopts Persian ritual and tries to impose proskinesis, bowing before the sovereign. For many Macedonians, it is too much. They see themselves not as Eastern subjects, but as comrades in arms of a Macedonian king. In 327 BC, the Eastern War reaches one of its most spectacular moments, the Sogdian Rock. The defenders consider it impregnable and taunt Alexander, saying that to capture it, he needs men with wings. Alexander answers with action. He chooses 300 mountain-trained men. At night, they climb the cliff with ropes and pegs. 30 fall and die. But at dawn, the survivors appear above the rock. The fortress surrenders, shaken more by the courage of the feat than by force of arms. Among the prisoners is Roxanne, daughter of the noble Oxyartus. Alexander marries her. Tradition emphasizes her beauty, but the political meaning is even more important. With that marriage, Alexander tries to bind himself to local Eastern elites and build a form of power that is not only Macedonian, but imperial. He has won the war against Persia, but the price is becoming ever clearer. To become king of Asia, Alexander starts to lose the old Macedonian guard. Alexander has founded more than 20 cities that will bear his name for centuries. He has beaten seemingly invincible armies. He has crossed deserts, mountains, and empires. He has burned Persepolis, the heart of Persia. Yet on India's frontier, something changes. For the first time, the conqueror who had bent the known world can no longer move forward. Darius does not stop him. Horus elephants do not stop him. The walls of a city do not stop him. His own men stop him. But why does antiquity's most victorious army decide that enough is enough, right there at the world's end? And how will Alexander, returning to Babylon, meet his death? After the campaigns in Bactria and Sogdiana, Alexander has pushed his army beyond the historic heart of the Persian Empire. He has hunted Bessus, fought local revolts, taken fortresses considered impregnable, and married Roxanne, binding himself to Central Asia's elites. But for him, it is not enough. To the east lies another frontier. Beyond the Hindu Kush mountains, the world of India begins. In 327 BC, Alexander turns southeast. After nearly 8 years of campaigns and roughly 11,200 miles of marching, his army is no longer the one that left Macedonia. It is around 40,000 strong, but by now it is a mosaic of Macedonians, Greeks, Persians, and Eastern troops. Behind the Macedonian army stretches not a single supply line, but a fragile system made up of conquered cities, local tributes, rivers, and scattered garrisons spread across thousands of miles. Many soldiers no longer feel like expeditionaries. They now feel like exiles. The army crosses the Hars Hindu Kush passes at elevations of 11,500 to 13,000 feet, then descends towards the Kabul Valley at the wider Indus system. This is no longer the war of great Persian capitals. Here, the terrain changes again. Mountains, gorges, rivers, fortified cities, and peoples used to fighting in difficult country. The advance is not a simple march. Along the way, Alexander has to switch between force and diplomacy. Some communities submit, others resist. Among the most celebrated episodes is the capture of Aornos, a famous mountain fortress that, according to tradition, even Heracles had failed to conquer. For the Macedonian king, conquering it means measuring himself against myth once again. Where ancient heroes had failed, he wants to succeed. Then comes Taxila. The local king, Ambi, opens his gates and decides with Alexander against the stronger neighboring ruler, Porus, who controls the broad territory beyond the Hydaspes. It is a decisive political move. Alexander understands that India cannot be taken by phalanxes alone. He must also exploit local rivalries, turning one king against another. Ahead lie new rivers, new plains, and an enemy unlike any he has faced before. In 326 BC, Alexander reaches the Hydaspes, today's Jhelum. On the other side of the river waits Porus, the king who controls the territory between the Hydaspes and the Aesones, today's Chenab. Here, the problem is not the enemy, it is the river. The Hydaspes is wide, rain-swollen, and hard to cross. Porus knows this and deploys his army on the opposite bank, ready to strike at the Macedonians at their most vulnerable moment. As they enter the water, with horses, men, and weapons exposed to the current. Alexander cannot attack straight across. It would be suicide. So he does what he does best. He misleads the enemy. For days, he moves units along the bank, makes noise, shifts cavalry, and simulates crossing attempts. Porus has to watch every point of the river, never knowing where the real attack will come. Then, during a night of rain and thunder, Alexander moves upstream with a selected force. He crosses the river far from the main point, using islands, darkness, and confusion. By the time Porus realizes what is happening, the Macedonians are already on his bank, Porus sends his son forward with cavalry and chariots to block the Macedonian bridgehead. But the attempt fails, and Alexander manages to secure the crossing. At that point, one of the hardest battles of his conquest begins. The Macedonian army numbers about 40,000 men. Porus can field about 30,000, including infantry and cavalry, plus chariots, and above all, war elephants. For the Macedonians, it is a shock. Elephants are not just huge animals. They are psychological weapons on the battlefield. They frighten horses, break formations, crush men, and create chaos in the phalanx. For the first time, the army that had bent Persia faces a force it cannot immediately control. The battle becomes ferocious. Alexander uses the cavalry to strike the flanks, while the Macedonian infantry advances with difficulty against the elephants and the Indian line. Little by little, Porus' army is squeezed. The elephants, wounded and maddened, end up creating disorder among their own men as well. Indian losses are heavy. Ancient sources give very high figures, such as 20,000 Indian infantrymen and 3,000 cavalrymen killed, with many elephants captured. In the end, Porus is defeated, but not humiliated. When Alexander asks how he wishes to be treated, Porus answers firmly, as a king. Alexander respects him, reinstates him, and entrusts him with even wider territories. It is a political choice. To govern northwestern India, he needs a strong local sovereign, not a devastated land. But the victory also leaves a personal wound. Soon after the battle, Bucephalus, the horse that had accompanied Alexander since adolescence, dies. In his honor, the king founds a city, Bucephala. Nearby, he also founds Nicaea to celebrate the victory. On the Hydaspes, Alexander has won again, but for the first time, the price of conquest begins to seem too high. After the Hydaspes, Alexander wants more. Victory over Porus is not enough. Ahead of him still lies a march farther into India. New rivers, new plains, new kingdoms. Beyond the Hephaestus, today's bays, the road opens towards the Ganges and toward powers the Macedonians know only through stories, exaggerated numbers, and unsettling rumors from afar. But the army has reached its limit. For 8 years, it has fought with almost no real pause. It has crossed Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, Bactria, Sogdiana, and now India. It has overcome deserts, mountains, great rivers, brutal sieges, local revolts, war elephants, and monsoons. For Alexander, every new frontier is a promise. For his men, it has become a nightmare beginning all over again. The breaking point comes in the Hephaestus. There, the army refuses to continue. It is not panic. It is not cowardice. It is years of accumulated fatigue. Ahead of them is not a single battle, but another world to cross. More rivers, more armies, elephants, rain, and distance from Macedonia. Honos, one of the most respected commanders, speaks for the soldiers. He tells Alexander what no one wants to say. The men have followed him to the ends of the world, but now they want to go home. Soon after, Honos dies. Alexander reacts badly. He shuts himself in his tent for 2 days, waiting for the army to change his mind. But the camp stays still. The soldiers' silence is stronger than any order. At last, Alexander yields. On the Hephaestus, he raises 12 altars as tall as towers. They mark no victory, only the farthest limit of the march. It is not a military defeat. No king has beaten him in battle, but it is the first true political defeat of his life. For the first time, Alexander must accept that his desire is no longer enough. After the Hephaestus, Alexander accepts that he has to turn back, but he does not choose a simple return west. He decides to descend along the great Indus system, turning the retreat into a new campaign. He has a great fleet built, organizes transport along the rivers, and gives Nearchus a decisive role. He will later lead the naval expedition along the coast. The route follows the rivers, from the Hydaspes toward the Essenes, then along the Indus to the Delta and the ocean. The Indus fleet gathered there numbers hundreds of vessels, perhaps up to 800. Not only warships, but riverboats, horse transports, and supply ships. One contingent, about 17,000 to 20,000 men, is entrusted to Nearchus for the voyage toward the Persian Gulf. But even the return is full of resistance. Local peoples do not always submit easily, and Alexander keeps fighting as he always has, in full view of everyone. The most dramatic episode comes during the campaign against the Malians. In an assault on a fortified city, Alexander is among the first over the walls. For a moment, he is almost isolated, surrounded by enemies. He is struck by an arrow that pierces his armor and enters his chest. His men manage to save him, but panic spreads through the army. For several hours, many believe the king is dead. It is an echo of the Granicus. There, too, Alexander risked his life on the front line, but now that courage begins to seem increasingly dangerous, almost self-destructive. Finally, he reaches the ocean. For Alexander, it is an immense symbolic moment. After years of campaigns, he has brought Macedonians to what, for them, is the world's edge. Then comes the real return. The army is divided. Nearchus sails along the coast. Craterus leads some troops by a safer inland route. Alexander chooses instead the route through Gedrosia itself, the Macron Desert. There is calculation behind the choice. Alexander wants to surpass the legendary feats of Cyrus and Semiramis, and perhaps maintain contact with the fleet. But the result is a disaster. The march towards Pura lasts about 60 days. Heat, thirst, sand, dead animals, uncertain guides, and scattered columns turn the return into a human and logistical catastrophe. The sources do not agree on numbers, but according to some estimates, tens of thousands of people and animals may have died. Soldiers, servants, merchants, and pack animals. In 324 BC, Alexander returns to Susa. He is no longer just the conqueror who crossed Asia. He wants to turn conquest into a stable system. Here, he stages his most ambitious project, joining the Macedonian and Persian elites. The weddings at Susa are not a private celebration. They are a political act. Alexander marries Stateria, daughter of Darius, and perhaps also Peristatus, daughter of Artaxerxes III. Hephaestion, the king's closest companion, marries Drypetus, another daughter of Darius. In this way, their future descendants would be tied to the same Persian royal line. About 80 companions marry Persian and Median women. Thousands of soldiers who had already married Asian wives receive gifts. These are not romantic unions between peoples. They are imperial policy imposed from above, and Macedonians resent it. Soon after, at Opis, tension explodes. Alexander wants to discharge older or wounded veterans and integrate more Asian troops into his army. For him, it is an imperial necessity. For the Macedonians, it is humiliation. They now feel replaced. They are no longer the sole heart of the conquest. The fracture that once involved individual officers now involves the whole army. After the clash, Alexander manages to mend it only partly. Reconciliation happens, but trust never truly returns to what it was before. Then comes the most personal blow. At Ecbatana, in 324 BC, Hephaestion falls ill during celebrations and dies after days of fever. Their bond was so close that it was often compared to Achilles and Patroclus. According to some, it may also have been romantic. He was the figure closest to Alexander, the companion who had accompanied him through the transformation from Macedonian king to sovereign of Asia. His death overwhelms Alexander. The mourning is immense, almost beyond control. In Hephaestion, he does not only lose a trusted man, he loses the person who, more than anyone, had shared his idea of greatness. Alexander prepares almost royal honors for him. Tradition speaks of an immense funeral pyre at a cost of 10,000 talents. In 323 BC, Alexander returns to Babylon. He is not a tired king preparing to stop. He is already planning new campaigns, probably toward Arabia, and new projects in the Persian Gulf. Then he falls ill after a banquet. The cause remains debated. Malaria, typhoid fever, infection, poisoning, or the accumulated weight of years of wounds, stress, and alcohol. There is no certainty. In June 323 BC, Alexander dies in Babylon. Tradition says soldiers file one by one past the dying king, but no one receives a clear succession. There is a fragile half-brother, Aridaeus. There is an unborn child by Roxanne, and there are enormously powerful generals unwilling to remain in the shadows. The empire almost immediately begins breaking apart among the Diadochi. Alexander's body is diverted toward Egypt by Ptolemy. Alexandria becomes the center of his memory. In the Roman age, his tomb is still famous. Then it disappears. Alexander leaves no stable empire, but he leaves a new world. His tomb is lost. His world is not. If you enjoy epic history documentaries with animated maps, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos.